Thank you for joining us. We're with Tito Jackson, former Boston City Councilor, former mayoral candidate as well, and you are now the CEO of Verdant Medical. You now have 3 locations open. Could you tell us where they are?
Yeah, so we're in the process of this. There's a very long regulatory process that we are part of and actually moving down. And so I took over a company called Verdant Medical, and so Verdant has one of the older medical licenses. So those licenses are what they refer to as vertically integrated. That means they're required to do seed to sale, which means that we have to grow. So we have a grow facility that is going to be in Rowley, Massachusetts, which is up Route 1 near Topsfield and Ipswich, a little bit up from Saugus. And we will have a co-located dispensary on site there also. In addition, we are opening a dispensary in Provincetown. And we also will be opening a dispensary in Mattapan, or at least that is the plan. All of the things that I'm speaking about have local regulatory approval, as well as that we have to go to local regulatory approval, as well as the state regulatory approval.
And so why did Verdant Medical initially struggle to obtain licenses and open facilities around town?
Yeah, so remember the initial to get into this initially in the medical, you needed to have a $50,000 non-refundable fee. I refer to it as a donation to the state because you're never going to get it back. In addition, you needed to have $500,000 liquid, meaning in cash, in an account, in escrow. I don't know about you, but most of the people that I know would never be able to get into this with that hurdle. In addition, after that, you also had to deal with the regulatory hurdles of the cities and towns that you were trying to open in. And so the prior head of the company decided to step aside, and I was able to step in, and we're going to bring this company to fruition and open the 3 dispensary outlets, as well as the 1 cultivation facility. And I'm really excited about that opportunity because we also are very dedicated to the social justice aspect of this industry, not only the green bank note aspect of it. It's really about opening the doors of economic opportunity for the people who've had those doors shut in their face. And in fact, oftentimes been incarcerated over literally what I'm doing right now and what many of the other CEOs are doing. There are other CEOs who were on the street prior to me getting in this business, and we want to make sure that those who got locked up don't get locked out of the industry. And that's one of the things that I'm really working on as a CEO.
And we will get into the social justice aspect in a minute. But first, logistically still, are you still seeking approval from municipalities where you want to operate before officially selling?
Yeah, so we've signed a host community agreement with Rowley for both the cultivation facility as well as the dispensary. We are a host community agreement is imminent with Provincetown, and we are in the community engagement process with the city of Boston. And we are looking to hold our community meeting, I actually don't have a date, but in the future.
Okay, and do you believe that the Cannabis Control Commission is discriminating against smaller businesses with less money? This goes back to what you were saying.
Yeah, so you know what I would say? I think that the actual board, in terms of the Cannabis Control Commission, so how legislation works is that the legislators set basically the scaffolding, and when we look at the Cannabis Control Commission, they have to promulgate regulations and kind of implement it. So I would say the biggest hurdle is money, right? And so we start with, let's also deal with the fact that in the city of Boston, we have some of the highest income inequality. The median net worth of a white family is $247,500. The median net worth of a black family in the city of Boston is $8. I'm just going. That's a pronounced pause. There's a pregnant pause there on purpose. $8. And so what you're dealing with in terms of the issue, and understand we're dealing in an issue in an arena that has no banking. You can't go up the street and say, hey, can I get a private loan to open a cannabis shop? And in fact, even to put money in the bank, it actually costs us a lot of money to put money in the bank and have any banking at all. So I would say the first hurdle for most businesses is this issue of capital. So there are two programs that the Cannabis Control Commission is running. One is the Economic Empowerment Program. That if you applied from April 1st to April 15th, if you were Black or Latino, you live in a neighborhood disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, you were going to hire people who live in neighborhoods disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. You were going to procure your services or products from people who live in a neighborhood disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, and also hire individuals who have a CORI that you could get certified. But that program, and mind you, this is not the Cannabis Control Commission that wrote this into the legislation. This is the legislature. It's 2 weeks, right? So to get into the program, you literally had a 2-week window. And this is for communities who had been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, who've had less access to government, who've had less access to, I don't know, but I previously, and I worked in government, can't tell you, like, I was regularly on the mass.gov website just kind of searching and looking at stuff, right? It's not like a Boston Globe, Boston Herald, CNN that I would kind of normally look at on a daily basis, right? And so that disproportionality was baked in because of that small window. In addition, there is a social equity program that is being rolled out. I give them and I laud the work that they are attempting to do, but the thing that is not associated with the social equity program is actual money. And I'm sorry, I forgot one component about the economic empowerment program. It allows you to skip the line, right? So if you have this letter, you get to go to the front of the line. But if you go to the front of the line at, an expensive store, you can skip the line, but if you can't pay the bill, you can't walk out with the product. In this case, if you don't have the financial resources to actually get through the regulatory process, then it puts people in that position. So what I would say is, I think that's an issue. I also think the components around, these are baked in now too, around very, very high levels of security means that your build out. So there are things called micro businesses. Which basically I'm saying, hey, you want to start a smaller one, give you a little bit easier way to kind of get into this. But you know what? A micro business has to have the same type of security that I would have to have at my 50,000 square foot grow, right? Their windows have to be the same. Their panic button system has to be the same. The key card component. So in terms of cost, that is another component. And I would say one of the other very large obstacles is what's happening at the municipal level. When there are barriers to entry, such as zoning, that's really difficult. That makes it more, in particular with a city like Boston, where it costs so much to even live here, never mind a commercial space. Those barriers actually make it even harder in that space. So I think there are some distinct obstacles. I think at the state level, the Cannabis Control Commission is trying to do their best. I think there are modifications that need to be made to the programs, such as I would love to see Chanel Lindsay's plan implemented. She said that she thinks that they should reopen the economic empowerment component so more people can get through now that the Cannabis Control Commission actually has a staff and has the perch to kind of open those doors.
To push it further on the Cannabis Control Commission, what is your stance on the Massachusetts Grower Advocacy Council's lawsuit against the CCC for not reviewing contractual clauses in host community agreements?
Yeah, the law says the law, right? So there has to be someone to determine, and I've been a legislator, right? And so it's someone's job to enforce the law, right? And so it is going to be interesting and telling in this space. And to your point, if you have to give, so I need to let your viewers understand the tax structure in this space, right? So if they're interested, there's a really interesting movie. It's a documentary. It's called Cocaine Cowboys. It's on Netflix, and it features a person in D.C. in the early '80s. His name is Rayful Edmonds, and Rayful Edmonds was a huge drug dealer. He was moving truckloads of cocaine, and he was caught by the feds. And at that time, they didn't have the same type of drug laws, so they put him in jail based on tax evasion. Interestingly, he sued the federal government in 1981, and he said, "I'm a businessman, and just as any business person, I get to write off my expenses and all of the things that are based on me doing business." So he gave them all of the cocaine that he had ever sold, and the amount that he spent on that. And he sued the IRS and he sued the federal government and he won. So this is Reagan era. 1982, this big drug dealer just beat the federal government. They put forward something called 280E. Tax code 280E is still in place to this day, and it says any Schedule 1 or Class 1 drug, so that's heroin, cocaine, marijuana, which does not belong in that category. If you're selling that, you are only allowed to write off the cost of goods sold. In essence, that means our federal tax rate is 50%. Our state tax rate is 17%. And the stated municipal tax rate is supposed to be up to 3%. So if you're, you guys have phones and stuff, but the 70% tax rate if you're lucky. So that's where we start. So then to have additional percentage points at the local level, that is very difficult because of the cost of doing business, because those taxes don't back out all of the expenses that are there. In addition, from an equity perspective, if you have someone who is just able to get into this because of the funding that they've been able to pull together from friends, loved ones, those who are investors, then you squeeze them even more. And so I believe that we do need to decide, be it at the Cannabis Control Commission level or at the state level, what is the mechanism and body to actually determine that you can't go above the 3%. Yeah.
To move on, do you think cannabis should be commercialized or should it remain in the agricultural marketplace?
I think it should be. I think we have to be careful with what we wish for. And I was listening to members of the MRCC the other day, and they were saying that they think that it should roll out slowly, and also a couple things that we have to think about in the state of Massachusetts that we can learn from other states about the opening of this market. If you open too quickly and you give everybody a license to grow, you kill the market. So right now in the state of Massachusetts, per pound retail, it's anywhere from $5,500 to $6,000 a pound retail. In Oregon, you're talking between $100 to $400, maybe $500 per pound. Right.
So could you expand on the dangers of
So
doing this?
essentially, if you overgrow, you kill. So supply and demand. If there's too much supply on the market, then what will happen is, and this is, I think Massachusetts is unique in this space because the law actually looks at what we refer to as canopy. right? So those people in the growers understand that. But that's basically how many thousands or tens of thousands of square feet that you are growing. And interestingly, if you say you're going to grow 100,000 and you grow 60,000, you get smacked on the hand and they move down the amount that you're allowed to grow, right? So we're thinking about in a regulatory environment where we know how much is actually being grown, and if we control that, then we can keep the price at a market-based level that is sustainable. In addition, I think it's really important that we think about the aspects of if you move this across state lines, right? You then lose the value at the state, right? I want people to grow in the state of Massachusetts. There's several fold bottom lines here. So yeah, you have the wholesale cost, but you know what? It takes a lot of people to grow. So you have people who are hiring. We're going to hire 30 people at each store. We'll hire another group of folks to do the grow. So we also want those dollars to flow back into the pockets of people in the state of Massachusetts, and in particular, those people who are disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. If you now import it from Oregon, and you have cheap stuff that comes in at $100 a pound, I'm not an accountant, but I can count. What I know is that will kill our marketplace. So we have to be very, very thoughtful. And when we think about Marlboro today, I just saw the owner of Marlboro just tossed $1 billion into the cannabis market. So we need to be thinking about how we have small, medium, and even large, but not multinational folk in this industry who are able to survive and thrive and do other things. So one other piece I would also note is that we should be looking at openings for ancillary businesses, the things that support this industry, and how people of color and women can be involved. Because sadly, even in the 72 licenses that are preliminarily, I didn't have enough coffee yet, approved, only one of them is a woman, right? So when we're talking about this, the equity component of it, we're not only talking about people of color, we're talking about women, we're talking about veterans, we're talking about people in the LGBTQ community who should affirmatively be involved. But this issue of growing is a critical component.
So, but with this said, do you think the risk that you're detailing, do you think is going to happen with commercialization?
So on the federal side, there's a federal component to this. They're not moving that quickly on this issue. I know Senator Elizabeth Warren and her counterpart in Colorado have put forward legislation that basically, and I was teasing her about this, basically is a states' rights legislation. So I was like, after she described it to me, I was like, Senator Warren, this sounds extremely like states' rights, right? Which would mean that if the state legalizes cannabis, that the federal government would back off and basically go with the state legislature and the will of the people of those individual states versus the issue that we have now, where a lot of folks are very fearful of what can still happen at the federal government level. Up until 3-4 years ago, people's bank accounts were being seized. All kinds of very difficult things. People arrested for participating in this industry. So, yeah, we have. I can't predict the future in terms of the regulatory environment. I do think, though, Trump's tax cuts are going to affect this. And the manner in which they're going to affect it is that Colorado had over $250 million in revenue from the cannabis industry last year. If I'm a state legislator or a governor, and I now, when there's tax cuts at the national level, that means at the state level, my budget is smaller. Where am I going to get it from? Well, as a former elected official, people don't particularly love their housing taxes being raised, the real estate taxes. They don't really like that. They get pretty angry about that. And so if you're able to move forward with something like this, which is considered essentially a sin tax, and from a economic perspective is not a broad-based tax. I believe that you will see many other states moving forward. You saw Michigan in the midterm elections move forward with rec. You saw a couple of other states move forward with medical, and that first medical step is really the pathway into recreational.
And just to be clear, were you criticizing the senator's proposed bill? If you were
No,
Senator
no, no.
Congress,
I wasn't critical. I was giving her. There was some irony in the fact that the methodology was one that was analogous to a states' rights. I actually think it's the right thing to do.
it should go to the states.
It should go to states.
Okay.
It should absolutely go to the states, and it should go to the states, and it should be moved off of a Schedule 1 or Class 1 drug. This is not cocaine. This is not heroin. And by the way, when you look at the places that have recreational, you see a decrease in opioid deaths. So to me, what you see are positive effects relative to the opening of this market. Sadly, because this is not, and the other piece that you get by taking it off of a Schedule 1 drug on a federal level is it allows you to do FDA studies. So we don't have, and the GW Pharma actually just put out a CBD drug for pediatric epilepsy. It helps with seizures. So that gets approved by the FDA and the FDA panel. But that's the CBD side of the plant. And so for people who don't know, that's the non-hallucinogenic side of the plant. On the THC side, we have not been able to do the actual studies to speak to people's clinical outcomes in this space. And so the other aspect that I want to see at the federal level is it to be moved from the Class 1 Schedule 1 drug to Schedule 2, which would allow for actual testing and placebo-controlled, double-blind, randomized. And there's all these words that they toss out about the testing. But that also can show whether or not there's a clinically positive outcome of using THC, and also the many classifications of CBDs.
And to get back to the market, do you see big marijuana as a good or bad player in the economics of cannabis?
You know what's? It's funny. Excuse me. There's a duality here, because when you say "quote unquote" big marijuana, you got to be pretty big to get in this market. Like, so let's also speak in numbers. It is my estimate that it's probably at least $1 million to open a store in Boston. And so the thought of the hope, dream, and wish for a mom and pop store, I don't know that to be something that is real, unless municipalities actually did something for that. And one of the ways that they could do that is the 3% that they take at the municipal level. If they wanted to, they could actually either loan or invest that back into businesses if they wanted to. So big marijuana is now something that's going to continue to broaden the market. And I think you're going to need those large players to open up the marketplace as a whole. And I think we want to see opportunities for those large folks to actually invest in some of the smaller folks. And there's on a social equity side, when we have that conversation, I would love to kind of think through or talk through some of the things that I'm thinking of in that space. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I think this category of quote unquote big marijuana, the people who are participating in this space have lots of money. And for them to put money into you or your company is a critical component to people being able to expand, actually to even open, expand, and get into the marketplace.
And to touch on another subject, do you think the government should go about reforming its marijuana incrimination process?
I believe that in the state of Massachusetts, that anyone who has been convicted of a marijuana-related crime, it should be expunged from their record. It's legal. Should be absolutely expunged. And we will, the largest dispensary in the state of Massachusetts is right up the street from here. It's on Route 9. They have sold more in a year than I would suggest that the top 50 people who've been caught in the state of Massachusetts in the past 10 years have moved. And so I believe at this point, because we know that the war on drugs was a war on people of color, and it was a war on poverty. And Tupac, really spoke to that when he said, instead of a war on poverty, they have a war on drugs, so police can bother me, right? So when it comes down to it, we really should be very thoughtful about that piece. The second, actually, the initial component here should have been taking care of those folks who were disproportionately affected. And by the way, the interesting piece is the disproportionality was more pronounced in urban areas where you have school zone, right? So in Boston, you had you have these mandatory sentences for you selling drugs in a school zone. So you're within 1,000 feet of a school. Interestingly, in the city of Boston, we have 124 schools in our public system. I have no idea about the Catholic system and then the charter school system. In addition, it refers to parks. And so what you have, in particular, if you're in Roxbury, Dorchester, or Mattapan, schools, church, park, that's the whole neighborhood. And so these people, generally people of color, in Massachusetts, you had 3x the chance of being arrested for possession. You had 7x the chance of being arrested for distribution if you were black. That's the ACLU's analysis and study. Those people, if I rule the world, I free all my sons. When it comes down to this, I would absolutely, like other states are doing, you've seen it in San Francisco, and you've seen it in other states relative to this actual expungement. And actually, even in Canada, they're actually participating in this. It is the right thing to do. It's the righteous thing to do. And from a financial perspective, it is absolutely the most thoughtful piece financially. Because, by the way, who has more experience in the industry than those individuals who participated in the industry? When I did pharmaceutical sales, I worked for Johnson & Johnson. And you know what? When I applied for Eli Lilly, they looked at my resume and said, your work at Johnson & Johnson is called transferable skills. Well, this is the same component. These are transferable skills, and there are people who have a great deal of experience and knowledge that can actually participate in this industry and understand in the city of Boston, it's $20,000 to educate a child, but it's almost $60,000 to incarcerate somebody in Suffolk County. Hey, you know what? We have an opportunity to help those individuals who had participated a little bit too early in the industry in getting a job, economic opportunity, taking care of themselves and their families. But there's another component, safety. Interestingly, people who sell drugs typically don't only sell one drug. And so the other component here is it makes a lot of sense that individuals who had previously been in this industry have an opportunity to participate, and that would be healthier for everybody on the street, and also between turf and gang beef, I think we could actually cut the amount of violence that goes on in the city. If we do nothing, you will then have people who we've put out of business, because the least innovative part in this is selling cannabis, because people were doing it before two Tuesdays ago. That's the least innovative part of this. there are people, many of them people of color, who had been doing it in the quote unquote illicit market. Many of them are going to go out of business. So we need to be thoughtful at what happens if they go out of business. How are they going to feel? What are their motivations going to be? And what's going to happen to them in this marketplace and out on the streets? We better be really thoughtful and deliberate about bringing them into this industry. And I think we could do better at the state level about being clear that people who have a Corey have that opportunity to be in here.
And how do the communities feel when you build locations? I was thinking about there was a Wicked Local article in Randolph where people around where you're originally going to build in Randolph were very annoyed, outraged that you're building there. How do they feel now?
So it's really interesting. So that was the previous leader at the company. Interestingly, there are people who have very strong feelings. But what I would say is there was a meeting a little bit earlier this week in Mattapan. That was a local community meeting, and people were very angry. I've gone to community meetings, and I've had some of my elders, some people who know my family, who were angry with me. And my explanation is simply this. This is literally the law. And take, for instance, a city like Boston. We have to have at least 50. We have 21 neighborhoods in the city of Boston. So simple back of the envelope math, that means there's going to be 2 in each neighborhood. So if there's going to be 2 in each neighborhood, who do you want to be involved in that? Do you want it to be someone from Colorado, someone from Oregon, or someone that you know, someone that if something happens, if there's an issue, then you can call them, someone who's going to hire people from the local neighborhood, someone who's going to put their philanthropy in the local neighborhood, someone who's going to train folks, and our company actually provides, we have mandatory financial literacy paid classes. We pay people to take these classes. So we're thinking about their future. We also are being really thoughtful about trying to hire local folks. We have a goal of hiring 20% folks who have a Corey. So do you want that person? Or do you want the person who, speaking of big cannabis, who comes in, has no ties to the neighborhood, no ties to the community? And by the way, the interesting thing that I found with the media coverage of Leicester as well as Northampton was the lack of diversity in the staffs of those dispensaries. I didn't see any people of color on staff. And so I realize there are people who are not going to change their mind about how they feel about cannabis. I got a conversation coming up with my pastor too. I had to talk to my mom and I had to talk to my family. I absolutely get that. But this is legal, and most people of color miss the tech boom. Biotech and life science, they miss that too. They miss clean and renewable and the green economy and the energy side of things. We're already in this industry. Their family members are in this industry. So the question is, does this industry open on the quote-unquote legal side? And we're absolutely out of this industry, which will be several $100 billion. And we will still have, actually, my definition of failure is Denver. One of the dispensaries is, I believe it's called Native Roots, but they have one dispensary that is owned by a black person out of over 700. And last year, over a 50% increase in arrests of black people. Why? Because they're not in the industry. And so one of the other components is if you don't have any owners who are people of color, who have a higher chance or higher propensity of actually hiring other people of color, then we will be locked out of these. So not only will we be locked up, we're going to get locked out of this industry. And so I know that these community meetings are going to be hard, because the other component here is that many of these neighborhoods voted at 70% to legalize, but they don't want it next to their house, and I get that. And they also assume, this is the other component, that once we go through our presentation, people kind of are able to understand we're not trying to get robbed, right? And I'm never, ever, 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 ever going to sell to a child, ever. And by the way, this is also industry. Your average transaction, depending on who you are, is between $85 and $125, right? So there's not going to be somebody standing at the door. If you now mind you, if you stand out in front and you collect $125 in quarters, I'm going to hire you, right? So when it comes down to it, many of those issues are very different. Understand, you can do a wine tasting in a liquor store, right? We will never, ever give out anything free. We have seed to sale tracking. So the Cannabis Control Commission tracks that seedling from when it gets to be a certain height all the way to my store and then out the door. So the interesting piece is it's much safer than what you see at liquor stores. No person under the age of 21, we card you 3 times when you're in the store. One to get in, one to get in again, and another time when you pay. So you can't use your big brother or big sister's information. You're going to get caught in that system. So it's a much safer, and mind you, everybody in our industry has to follow and abide by these rules. So these are difficult meetings. They're difficult. It's a difficult topic. But I think 3 years from now, interestingly, in Mattapan, my store is 2 or 3 doors down from CVS. You can get OxyContin, you can get Percocet, you can get Vicodin, you can get Valiant, you can get all of those products a couple of doors down from me. We had over 2,000 people in the state of Massachusetts die of opioids last year. Name a single person, and I don't know of any who actually who OD'd last year on cannabis. So these are going to be difficult conversations, but there will be 50 at least. So the question is, who do you want those 50 to go to?
When you sell your cannabis products, do you just go by age requirement? You mentioned that you card 3 times, but is there any other requirement that you need to make sure that they need it, or is it?
Yeah, so we don't, the other piece is that we have patient service associates who bring you through the process. Not all cannabis is the same. The effects of one strain are different than the effects of another strain. If you have anxiety issues, if you are having problems sleeping, if you want to have a little upper or want to be a little bit happier on a day-to-day basis, there are different strains. So we have folks who are trained, and the thing is, we do want to make sure that people know that once we have our approvals, we will be hiring, but we provide training, so you don't have to come to us and know all about every aspect of cannabis. And so we train our PSAs in that space. We will be co-located, meaning that we will probably receive our recreational licenses first, but we will continue. Our company was started around a platform of palliative care, those folks who were pretty sick, and we want to make sure that we keep the medical aspect there also. The medical patients obviously have a card, and that's another system. They don't pay taxes. And they will also receive a significant discount on a weekly basis for those who are indigent patients as well as veterans on the medical side. So again, there's a whole host of strains that are out there. We have edibles, actually some pretty cool gummies, and some fair trade chocolates. One of the things that we're going to be stocking also is that we can do well and do good at the same time. And we have some products that are in a line in that space. So we have a lot to offer in that space. So we try to customize the sale to the individual based on what they want and how they want to feel.
So to be clear, right now, Verdant Medical is advertising medical marijuana, but eventually you will sell recreationally as well.
Well, we probably will, and this is to your point, we will have to make some modifications to our name, right? Because we obviously started as a medical company, but it is going to be critical that we actually let people know the recreational licensure will probably come first. And so the adult use side will actually come online before the medical side, just from how the actual process works.
So it won't be called Verdant Medical soon.
Yeah, so you messing with my name, brother? Okay, cool. Yeah, but so we will have to we'll probably be modifying that aspect. Yep.
Okay, and now just to bring it to a larger point, one interesting aspect about you is in 2014, so you were in the Boston City Council, you voted to increase the councilor salaries by $20,000. Now that you've left office, I'm just wondering, have you changed your opinion on that, or?
Not at all. It was if you look at the council, interestingly, this is one of the most qualified councils that you've ever seen. So when you look at the number of, Councilor Campbell's a lawyer, Councilor Wu is a lawyer, Councilor Flaherty's a lawyer, Councilor, I'm missing somebody. Who else? Who else is? Councilor Zakem is a lawyer. You have, I think, and again, I'm speaking as someone who's no longer on the council. I think you have one of the most qualified councils that you've ever seen, and I do believe that the compensation component led to that. And so you have people who may not have been able to run their household had it not been for that space. So I think you're going to see a continued great group of counselors who are very qualified, knowledgeable about doing that work. And I know at that time, maybe my verbiage was not the best, but when it comes down to it, I do believe that and stand behind that vote. It is expensive to live in the city, and folks do understand what they sign up for. But I think the proof is in the pudding, in terms of and the other pieces. I think, and you are very adept in the municipal politics. I think you've seen more people run for council. So I think that's another component that it's a very good aspect, that it is more competitive now. In terms, and this go round, I'm hearing 15, 16 people running for at-large. That's a good thing. I think it's critical that people contest these races. And I know everyone, is speaking about it at the federal level, and that's great. I think there's some great things that can happen at it. But you know what? The government that touches you, the government that most affects your life, is municipal government. And I've always said, in particular for young people, and I've always wanted more young people to participate, and I someday will actually do something that I want to refer to as Freshmen at Fenway, where we invite all first-year students to Fenway Park. Because, interestingly, in Boston, the way that we greet college students and young people to the city of Boston, the first interaction that we have with you is we ticket or tow your car. It's the first thing, that's most people's first experience with the city of Boston. And in fact, we lose 52% of college students within 6 months. And that's Boston and Cambridge blended numbers. And the reason why I believe is that we don't have positive touch points. And I also believe that we don't invite them into government. I think we have an opportunity to do that. Like I said, I'd love to have all of y'all at Fenway Park. do a day of service, come back and have some really cool concert. I would love to have Beyonce, but something like that. Have people register to vote that day, because one of the missed components is there should be someone who was at one of the colleges and universities in the city of Boston who's in office. You just have to live here and be 18. There's 150,000 of y'all, and we very regularly we make rules about, or the council that I was on makes rules about young people like yourself. No more than four. No more than four of you can sign a lease. What if BU costs a lot of money, right? We might have to, 6 of us might have to live in an apartment to make this thing work. Well, we made a law that directly affected you without you being present on the body, and something that's going to adversely affect your life and potentially mean, that some people can't finish school. So I think it is absolutely critical that we open those doors. And with those resources, by the way, if that individual was to, because the council has also since voted for additional raises, that individual would probably pretty comfortably be able to deal with their issues around going to school.
Mm-hmm. And still on the council,
Yeah.
with Ayanna Presley moving to the House, Althea Garrison is going to take her space. I'm just wondering, what do you think her impact will be on the dynamic of the council?
You know what? I don't. It's really interesting. I've actually, Althea and I have run. Althea's run against me several times. Althea has viewpoints. Actually, one of the individuals who I know who spends more time in the library than almost anyone I know. Althea is in the library probably 20 hours a week, researching and writing policy and the like. What I would say is I don't believe that Althea will change the dynamic of the council in terms of the moving the council further to the right, as many people have asserted. I think that the actual council will be able to continue on in dealing with the issues that are important out there. And I think, and I actually, interestingly, as someone who's run, Althea is a formidable opponent in terms of candidacy. She is one of the hardest working individuals that I have ever run against. We disagree on issues of abortion and gay marriage and many other substantive issues. Interestingly, many of those issues I don't foresee coming up for actual a vote on the council. So many of the issues, most of the issues that are being heard on the council will be a little bit different than those kind of larger issues. So it'll be really interesting to see. But the thing is, what we're hearing is a lot more people are going to run. Again, all of that to me is good for democracy. It's good for our city, and it's good for the electorate to have a whole range of people who can kind of think through, who they can think through in terms of putting in there.
And to wrap this up, do you foresee running for office yourself at some point in the near future? Or?
You know what? I am building Verdant. The part that I didn't get to talk about, in addition to building Verdant, I'm running a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, and I'm partnering with a company called Sea Hunter Therapeutics to get people the missing link. Getting people of color the financial resources to open their doors. And so I'm working with, and if individuals want to contact me, it's Tito at Verdant, Verdant -medical.com. What we're doing is dealing with this age-old issue. When people deal with businesses owned by people of color, oftentimes they want to give you technical assistance. There's an old song that's called "Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent." You got to have a job if you want to be with me. There's a rap song called "It's All About the Benjamins, Baby." When it comes down to it, this is not a space that people don't necessarily know how to run this business, because there's people who are actually doing it without a COO, a CFO, accounts payable, and accounts receivable department. The real issue is, do you have the $1 million in not a bank loan, but in actual cash to actually get into the business? So we're running a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. I call it our economic empowerment program. And so this actually opens the door of opportunity for those individuals who are people of color. I don't call them minorities, because in the city of Boston, more than 50% of people are people of color. Those individuals who want to get into this business and have that obstacle of getting through based on the financial front. We do that. We also help them with consulting services and the regulatory services to get them through the licensure process and to get into business. So I'm really excited. We're working with about 20 organizations thus far, and would love to work with more.
So to my point, you're into Verdant Medical, or Verdant, whatever it'll be called, for the long run.
Yeah, we got to, I didn't, I'm not dabbling. I got a really big toe. I'm not just sticking it in the water. I am immersed here. But I would simply say the work that I was doing on the council continues in the cannabis industry. Diversity, equity, inclusion, economic opportunity, mobility, and we pay $15 an hour. So when I said I've done the whole fight for 15 thing, and it'll be really messed up. Be like, yeah, and you would, and I know you're astute. You'd have been asking me, oh yeah, so Tito, I saw you sign on to all that fight for 15 stuff. How much you pay? And I know if I said $11 an hour, you might look at me a little weird. So that's the other component, is that the tenants, and I believe as a CEO, I can also lead and not follow in this space, and also create an environment competitively with other companies that they have to also step up to the plate and do right by their employees relative to these standards. But the other piece is people of color have to be included. And those wrongs that you noted about people who have records, there's a version 2.0 of cannabis reform that we have to go back and deal with. And those are some of the many issues that we have to look at. And we should look at how many people of color get into this business. If it's one, we're actually doing worse than Colorado right now. If it's one, that's the same as Colorado, which I define as failure. So if we create a whole new industry, and I want to give the executive director props on this of the Cannabis Control Commission, Sean, and he said, if we just simply create another bureaucracy in the state of Massachusetts, then we failed. If we don't create diversity, equity, and inclusion, then we have actually failed. And I know that's their goal. I will continue to work with them on that.